Okay, so as we talk about Louis XIV and the way in which he's developing Renaissance culture, we are talking about both Baroque and Neoclassical elements of design. But we're talking about clothing, architecture, all kinds of different stuff. And I'll give you some examples. You see three on there. But the big idea I want to put across here is that in the Baroque era, which is where we are talking about an era in which you show how excellent you are externally, as I spoke about earlier. So these are just three tiny little examples of, take a look at that table on the left. That is a classic example of a Baroque table, and it is something that is designed to be aesthetically beautiful. But I also want you to think about that table as a political statement, because we don't tend to think of furniture as a political statement, right? So from a historical political standpoint, that table says whoever paid to have this table made knows enough about Greek culture to put different little images of the Greek gods or whoever on there, and to know the history and style and background. You've got to be aware of what's going on. This also makes a political and economic statement, because not only is there gold on that table, and this is a table that is going to be a side table and will be fairly impractical and rarely used, but it just sits there, right? Not only is there gold on it, but the workmanship, the man hours that it took to create that table are beyond imagination compared to what we could think of today. And go over here to the right. This is a bedroom in Versailles. That's a bedroom, guys. How many man hours went into just that bedroom? I mean, thousands and thousands. Forget about the dollars spent on the raw materials. That's an unbelievable amount of money as well. But just the amount of money to take all those raw materials and craft them into this beautiful thing. These are enormous cultural and political statements that says the owner of these things, this table, this bedroom, is fantastic and cultured and wise and wealthy and willing to show off that wealth in a really extravagant way. And there is, by the way, that owner right in the middle. There's another Louis XIV here. Again, he's got his sexy calves out here, but he's also posing in this amazing cloth with these fleur-de-lis on it, and his cloth matches the furniture. I mean, there's just excess, visual excess in all of these things. These are three tiny little examples of the visual excess of the era. If we were to, for instance, take a stroll around the outside of Versailles, take a look here on the left at these gardens. They are manicured. They are detailed to within an inch of their life. They demonstrate that Louis XIV has the time. Well, he doesn't need to take the time, right? But that the people he pays have the time to make this place a perfect place. Sculptured, structured, and organized by man. Things are not out of control here at all. We got trees in pots, for God's sake, right? And some of those trees are actually trees that couldn't otherwise survive in France. The reason they're in pots or little boxes is because now we can wheel them inside in the winter and have a lovely interior. We are going above and beyond to create visual excellence and superiority in all things in Versailles. On the right, I mean, I don't even know what I need to say about that, aside from it's just beyond belief in terms of the excess and the detail. Structure, it's geometric, it's ordered, it's hierarchical. It illustrates a dominance of human control. We see this in the theaters as well. Here's an interior painting of a theater at Versailles, and you want to talk about visual excess. Pretty impressive, all that's going on here in terms of the significant visual excess. And I'll show you some other examples of that later, right? Or let's go outside of Versailles and do some theater. Right? I think when I talked about Rome, I talked about these naumachia, these mock naval battles that they would do. The French did very similar types of things. They didn't have slaves killing each other, but they did have enormous parade-type little mythic interactions where they built enormous boat dragon things and ran them around on the ponds at Versailles for, as you can see, the gentleman right there in the middle, the king. So this is a time when visual excess and display is a really big deal. Here's yet another one. This is the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. And what we see here is a place where we are spending as much money as we possibly can and repeating and providing more and more detail and more intricacy at every turn. There are no plain surfaces in this building anywhere. And so my question for you there is, how does Tartuffe fit the Baroque era? Because it is a Baroque play with ornamentation and detail and even indulgence. Now, it rises above and beyond the Baroque, but I would argue that there are definitely influences of either plot or character, or most likely language, influences of ornamentation, detail, and even Baroque-style indulgence. So having considered that, let's also consider the notion of seeing and being seen in neoclassical France. And what I mean by that is, here's what we think about today, right? You go to the theater to see the show today. In neoclassical France, it's not that you don't care at all about the show, but you go to the theater to be seen seeing the show. And I've talked about this in a couple other eras, and I will continue to talk about it as we move forward. Going to the theater is a social event, and it is more important who sees you there and what you're doing than what you see on stage. So one of the best possible ways as a French noble to accomplish this, sit in the banquettes. The banquettes are seats that we would think of as sort of the opera boxes in contemporary society. Right, if you're looking at right off the side in the audience, or more likely the banquettes are frequently in French noble theaters, they're actually on the stage. So to the right side of this painting, you see 4 little boxes. Those boxes are on the stage. So you can't watch the play without watching the nobles in those boxes. All right, what if your theater doesn't have boxes? You know what? You can just double down on that. Sit right on the stage. Here's another example of an illustration from a French neoclassical theater. Everyone on the left and on the right here on the side, those are audience members. And audience members in this era, the nobility, are infamous for demonstrating their disregard for what's going on stage, because they're just there to be seen. Imagine the guys on my picture on the left here, imagine the guys on the left and on the right having a conversation with one another across the stage while the action's going on. There are even anecdotes of like French noblemen getting up and taking an actor's sword and hefting it and saying, "Hey, is this real?" Talking to the actors in the middle of the show. Plays were actually successfully performed, but boy, there was a lot of challenge because French theater is about being seen. And you go to the theater as a noble to be seen. Those are the very nobles for whom our playwright is writing his play. And Molière has some things to say about this. And this is from his written defense of a different play, a play called School for Wives. But he's a smart guy, and he knows he can't piss off the nobility, but he also has some things to say about them. So here's one part of the quote from his published defense of his play, The School for Wives. "When you paint men, you must paint from life. People want these portraits to be lifelike. And you haven't done anything if you don't make the audience recognize the people of your times." That seems like a pretty clear statement that, hey, I'm basically writing realistic theater here. And as we know from Tartuffe, Molière's kind of a satirist. He likes to satirize the people of the day. So there he is saying a statement that maybe could get him in trouble. If you haven't done anything if you don't make the audience recognize the people of your times. Here I am as a French noble. I'm reading that. I'm going, oh, really? You're putting me on stage? Me, the people of your times? I'm not sure I'm okay with that. So later on in the defense, Molière says this: "All the ridiculous portraits that are exposed on the stage ought to be seen by all without distress. They are public mirrors." Got it, good. "But they are public mirrors where one should never admit to seeing oneself. To be offended by the reproof of a fault is to accuse oneself openly of it." And work through the grammar and the logic of that second half there, right? What he's basically saying is, if you're offended by what I put on stage, it's not my fault. You are openly accusing yourself of the faults that I'm putting on stage. It's a fantastic little cover your ass sort of two-sided conversation that he's having here. On one hand, I paint very realistically. On the other hand, not you, someone else. So my question is, how does this play speak to a wealthy and noble audience that is obsessed with social position and with perception? So obsessed with perception, they're willing to sit on the stage in the theater to be seen. And then more importantly, find me the methodologies that our guy uses to get away with criticizing his audience. Because that's mostly what Tartuffe is. It's a direct criticism of everyone in the audience right to their faces. And they somehow love it, and he somehow gets away with it. Explain to me how he manages to do that.